Black Lives Matter locally has been doing bailouts since 2018. We've seen bailouts across the nation for quite a bit longer than that, but I guess Black Lives Matter kind of decided that cash bail was an issue they wanted to take up in 2018. And I think at the beginning, we were kind of like, I think our community doesn't know enough about the injustice of the cash bail system, and doing a bailout is really just to raise awareness around it, right? Obviously, we want to help people get out. We want to reunite families. The first bailout we did in 2018 was for Mother's Day. And so we were able to reunite a young mom and her almost 1-year-old daughter. And that was really great. And that impact was awesome. But it kind of stirred a lot of people around, like, what is Black Lives Matter doing? I can't, they're getting people out of jail. What does that mean? And so we also were able to kind of turn these bailouts into an educational piece, right? And educate the community on the injustices of the cash bail system. And so since then, we've actually bailed out 14 people, which is awesome. We've raised over $20,000 locally, specifically to bail people out. And so that's something we're really proud of. I think that's really awesome for such a small and local organization to be able to raise that much money just for bailouts is something that we're really proud of. I think when we started in 2018, we wanted to raise awareness, but we really didn't know exactly how we would be organizing, or what our role would look like in actually changing this legislation. But like Lewis said, in 2019, we found the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice, or maybe they found us, and we were able to partner up with organizations across the state who were actually working to make systemic change, right? Instead of just, in addition to the education, in addition to changing lives by reuniting families, we actually were able to work together to make some change that would end cash bail, right? And so obviously, like Lewis said, the Pretrial Fairness Act was passed this Wednesday, which is so awesome. And we're really happy that we could be a part of that statewide organizing. So that's kind of a little bit about BLM's involvement in the end of cash bail. And now I'm going to introduce you to two folks, and we're going to have a little discussion about the impacts of this legislation that was passed on Wednesday and what this might kind of look like for our community in our jail. So first up, I'm going to introduce Malik Aleem. He's an organizer with the Coalition to End Money Bond. And I'm also going to reintroduce Vera, who is a senior case manager with Labyrinth. So Malik and Vera, welcome. So I'm going to start with a question for Vera. So can you tell us a little bit about how you have seen incarceration impact your organization and the community that you work with?
Well, I think the impact is really the ripple effect. Really it's just the ripple effect of not being able to. What does that mean to not be able to post bond? Especially if it's a length of time, like they lose their children sometimes, if they're left with a babysitter. Sometimes they lose their children, they lose their apartment, they lose their job, they lose their car, they lose. So the longer they stay in, trying to raise money for a bond, like their whole life is basically like going down the drain. And then it's that much harder when you get out, like everything is gone. So where do I start? And if they have a background of crime, that's going to be the first thing that comes to mind. Like, I can get some fast money, so it's just a ripple effect. It's such an impact.
Right. And Malik, can you tell us a little bit more about the bill that passed this week and what some of those implications look like for jails across Illinois?
Yeah, so the most impactful part of this legislation, I think, is that most people will no longer so right now, a lot of people who end up in jail or end up with a bail getting set for their charge aren't actually ending up getting convicted for those charges and serving jail time anyway. And so what that means is that now, instead of a presumption of detention, pe- people will now have a presumption of release. A state's attorney can then, or a prosecutor can then um, file a motion for detention, and then they will have to come up with the actual evidence that suggests that this person should be in jail, rather than the opposite, which is what we have now within the status quo, that there's a presumption of detention rather than a presumption of release, if that makes sense. So, and then there's also other provisions, is that there's things like adding, for people who get put on electronic monitoring, adding that they have at least 2 days per week of movement where that they can go and purchase food, clothing. Right now, something that's often overlooked is that, when someone is incarcerated, the state is then given the responsibility of clothing that person, feeding that person, and housing that person. And oftentimes, when someone gets electronic monitoring, that person is then incarcerated in their home, and then they don't have anyone uh, that is designated to support in those areas. So under our bill, folks will have more kind of latitude to be able to take care of themselves if they find themselves in that situation. And there are other provisions as well. I'm happy to answer questions as we move along, but I think those are the most impactful, some of the most impactful provisions.
Yeah, and Malik, can you talk a little bit about if there's any provisions in the bill that would help encourage or help get people to their court date when it does happen, if they're no longer incarcerated pre-trial?
Yeah, that to speak to that point, I'm not exactly sure. Like there was a lot of negotiations that happened, but in our initial push for this bill, a big piece of it was making sure that people who have a demonstrated need are receiving phone calls and text messages to remind them about their court dates, and also to speak to that point. A huge deal in this legislation is that we've added a standard to the state law that didn't previously exist, which is called there's a distinction now between failure to appear and willful flight, right? So before, if you missed a court date, there was no distinction made as to whether you missed that court date because you had life circumstances. You have a job that you can't miss even a small amount of time. You don't have um, paid vacation time, versus actually going on the run from the government. And we know that most people are not going on the run from the government. Most people, if they do miss a court date, it is a failure to appear rather than a willful flight. And so that is taken into context now under our new law.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I know a lot of judges would take a failure to appear or an FTA as a reason to detain folks longer or increase the amount that they would have to pay to get out, right?
Right. Right.
Vera, can you tell us, just maybe in your work, if you had any, I know you told us a couple stories today, but just like, what do you see as like the long-term results of not being able to pay a bond? So I think you've mentioned, folks losing their house or losing their kids, but what about, a couple years down the road? How is that still affecting someone negatively just because they didn't have that money to be able to post?
I'm trying to think long term. Well, I just think for long term, I'm thinking like internal stuff, because it goes right back to my personal story. But the internal thoughts and beliefs that you have about yourself.
Yeah, and so, and I guess like, so, say you are trying to get things back on track, applying for jobs or things like that. How can that harm you?
Well, it definitely is going to be on your record. So it's really, really difficult to try to find a job. And it does go long term with trying to find a decent job with that still being on your record. And it's such a process with trying to get your record expunged and sealed. It's a wait when you need to be eaten now. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, that goes to the point that a lot of people take plea deals if they, uh, even if they hadn't done the crime, right? Because they have been incarcerated for so long, that can take a real mental toll.
Right. A lot of people are like take plea deals out of desperation. Like, you mean I get out today if I say I done this, even though I didn't? But the desperation to get out of jail, it's like, okay, I'll sign.
Right. Malik, can you tell us a little bit about how the elimination of cash bail can make our communities stronger and more resilient?
Yeah, definitely. I think the big part about this is that we're going to be able to um, make sure that individuals aren't having money that they don't actually even have extracted from them. And we know that the ripple effect on communities um, is great. And so under this new law, we feel like the impact will be that people will be able to actually have a fair shot when they go into the justice system, right? A lot of times, everything is stacked up against them under the status quo. Everything is stacked up against them, and it often feels like for someone facing a charge that um, they've been presumed guilty rather than innocent. And so when people have the ability to fight their case from a place of dignity rather than a place of incarceration, the outcomes for that are wildly more positive. And so we understand that, like Vera said, when people get caught into this kind of vicious cycle um, of doing things that maybe making decisions that they would not have made otherwise, and then the bond payment adding more stress onto families on top of that. And so we're completely changing the paradigm of how our justice system works. And we think that that will have a lasting impact on how people look at the justice system and how people engage with it.
Awesome. Vera, maybe just kind of a hypothetical question for you. I know you shared your story, but what would it have been like, in those two instances that you shared with us? What would it have been like if you didn't have to post a bond? If you were, able to just be free before your trial date, before your court date?
I think that it would give a person a time to take a look at, sometimes whether if they were guilty or innocent, but still take a look at putting themselves in allowing themselves to be in a certain situation. I just think without the bail, it would have been just like a total game changer. Like you come back with, um, what is the word I'm looking for? So you come back like more stable. You'll come back to court more stable. You're more apt to even come back to court, because you have your basic needs still being met.
Yeah, it's like you have some time to get some things together, to take care of your family, to take care of some other concerns, to maybe figure out a situation with work, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Can I just hop back in and give a better answer to a question you asked earlier about the phone calls and reminders? We so unfortunately in the negotiations for the bill, it was taken out that that would be a mandate for each county government. Those phone calls and reminders and texts. However, the Supreme Court Commission on Pretrial Practices also shared the same recommendation that that should be something that is implemented as a part of our pretrial system. So within the legislative process in lame duck veto session that just passed, we were not able to win that particular provision, but it is something that we're going to continue to push for, and that we have institutional support within the state judiciary in order to make it happen. So we're confident that that will be kind of the next part of the next, in this implementation phase, something that we're going to continue to push for.
yeah, I think, one pushback that I guess BLM hears in the community is like, well, people have to be in jail because they'll never come back, right? And like Liz mentioned, that is not a reason that people come back. And like, Vera is saying exactly, is people don't come back because the court date changed and there wasn't enough notice, right? People are trying to go to work and they're trying to get things organized with their family. They maybe don't have transportation. They maybe don't have childcare, right? And providing some of those things, providing a reminder, right? Letting people know, making sure they know when their court date has changed, getting them a ride to the courthouse, right? Those can make all the difference. And I think, like people against that would say, well, we just need to keep people locked up, right? But like Vera's saying, like Malik is saying, is that is not an ideal scenario for trying to, create justice in this system. It doesn't help in any way, right?
Yeah, I just had an incident with a young lady where she went to court, but when she got there, they told her her court date was the day before, and then told her this ridiculous amount of bond that she would need to post. So of course, she just left the courtroom like, I'm not gonna go turn myself in right now. I don't have that kind of money. And then it was a warrant for her arrest.
Right. And that's definitely one thing that people have been fighting for is like, if you miss your court date, right, you shouldn't have a warrant the day after because it could just be like that. You show up the next day and you realize it was moved or it was changed or you just missed it one day, right? And it shouldn't be the reason that you have a warrant out for your arrest. Malik, can you tell us what are some things that maybe you would suggest that we can actually do while folks are still locked up today? Because I know that this bill was passed, but it won't actually be implemented until 2023, which I think is a good thing for everyone on the call to note, is that while it was passed on Wednesday, it won't really be implemented until 2023. So what are some things that you would suggest that we can do until we see this legislation implemented?
Well, I think a big part of it would be to actually defend the legislation, right? Learn about what the provisions are, what are the ins and outs of how our pretrial system will work moving forward in 2023, right? That's a 2-year implementation date. We don't see as a major concession. We see it as kind of a good amount of time for us to be able to train up different judges in different municipalities to be able to actually follow this law. We think that it'll be important for people on the ground in different communities to identify judges that they feel like will be a problem in accepting these changes and actually implementing them. And that'll be a whole nother kind of silo of organizing in terms of holding judges accountable. And we have to continue to do the same work that we've been doing, since I met you last year in Bloomington Normal, and that is, supporting the people who do find themselves incarcerated, making sure that that we have robust community support behind those people, because oftentimes we're talking about the pretrial system, right? And that means that we don't know whether folks are guilty or innocent, and then that's really not our job to determine. It's our job to make sure that our systems work in the most fair way possible, and that people who often fall through the cracks are taken care of. And so we'll have to continue to do that in this interim period, and we'll also have to kind of study up on the legislation, be able to answer questions, defend it, because it will be attacked. There will be no doubt about it that there was huge opposition to this legislation, but it was solid, it was strong legislation, and that's why it passed. And so we just have to continue to defend our policy change.
Yeah, and maybe a question for Vera. In these next couple of years, right, we'll still see people incarcerated pre-trial. And what do you think how would we support folks who are incarcerated pre-trial? How will we support people who are in the jail? What are some things that you might think are important there?
Um, well, I am currently like doing a group every week. So personally, that's how I really just try to give back through the Path to Healing group. And I hear a lot of their concerns while I'm in there, and a lot from the inside needs to, be addressed as well. Like right now, they only have a couple of hours out during the day. And one of those hours, the day that I teach Path to Healing, they're in group. Um, um, the visits is just it's just ridiculous right now. So if you don't have money, then you're just not visiting right now. And the technology is like very hard to figure out, how do I connect with the person that I am trying to visit, and whether if you connect with them or not, your money is still being taken off. So I'm thinking about like all that kind of stuff like really needs to change. Like I didn't get to see them, they didn't get to see me, but the money still came off. But we never did make a connection. I think that needs to change. The fact that they do not have like socks. If they didn't go to jail with socks, they're not provided with socks or undergarments or um, soap and toothbrush and toothpaste. They are given like a little energy bag when they first get there, but that is not enough to last throughout the week. And then that's just it. I think if you have like over $1 on your books, you can't get another energy bag because you have money on your books, which is not enough to buy anything that you need to get through the week. So I just think like the changes need to start from the inside. And I am not really sure how to go about doing that, but I'm definitely in here wanting to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot like why a lot of folks logged on today, right? Is to learn about some of these injustices. So I appreciate you sharing that. And one thing that Black Lives Matter is definitely very concerned about is the situation at the jail because of COVID, right? So we have seen folks being held on lockdown for a very long time, right? Only being let out for maybe 1 to 3 hours out of their cells for 1 to 3 hours per day, which obviously can take a real mental and physical toll. But also, yes, we've been very concerned about the video visitations and phone calls for a while. Black Lives Matter did a fundraiser earlier this year to provide folks in the jail with money to put on their books so that they could call their loved ones or have a video visit. Because as you're saying, right, most of our jail here in McLean County is actually folks pre-trial, waiting for their court date. So they need phone calls and video visits to get things organized, right? They've got kids, they've got jobs, they've got family, things are happening, especially during COVID, right? Can you imagine being locked up pre-trial before you've been convicted of any crime during COVID and trying to manage kids who are half online, half at home, right? Family who may or may not be sick, trying to make sure that you get groceries, but also, being concerned about just the general rise in COVID cases here in our county. There's a lot of reasons that you should be able to communicate, and you need to be able to communicate with folks outside, right?
And I
And
just and to
so,
add to that, Olivia, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but just to add to
no,
that, also just like the fact that like how can you gather the facts related to your case if you're sitting in a cell and you can't talk to your lawyers, you can't send them, you can't actually give them good information about what happened in any given scenario that where you're finding yourself locked up, right? Like to be able to participate in your defense is so very important, right? To be
Right.
able to gather facts, to speak to witnesses, or to send your representation. To be able to do that, you need to be able to communicate.
Right.
right. And I think, an important piece is looking at how expensive these calls are, right? How expensive these phone calls and video visits are. And those aren't paid for, right? Vera, do you have any, do you want to talk about the expense of things when you are incarcerated pre-trial, maybe that you know about?
Well, you would think that it would be cheaper because you're incarcerated, but it's not. It's not cheaper. It's even more expensive. So I have a nephew who is incarcerated now, and um, the setup is just was just not an easy setup. So I was just trying to put $50 on so we can visit. And it never told me that I put the $50 on. So I done it again. So it ended up being $100. And I still have not had a visit. But we're down to like 60 something dollars just at the attempts to trying to log on. You know, it's either not showing up on his end or it's not showing up on my end. So the visit has never taken place. But I was like, just call, because the visit is just, it's just not working. And it's really disappointing to his kids, you know, because they're there, they're wanting to see their dad, and it's just not working. But I'm still being charged for it. So it is very frustrating. And he is on a pretrial. He has not been proven guilty yet, but it's like, what happened to the saying of you're innocent until proven guilty? But the act of it is you're guilty until you bond out.
Yeah, and I know, one thing, I know a lot of folks here are local, right here in McLean County, and we actually know that a lot of these contracts with the folks with video visits and phone calls here at our jail are actually controlled by our county board. So I just think that that's a really important thing to note as we try to hold people accountable for the justice systems here in McLean County, is that this isn't just, a random contract that just happens hidden away. This is a contract that is signed by the chairman of the McLean County Board, right? And so we actually found that the vendor that facilitates the video and phone conferencing here in McLean County at our jail offered free video visitation during COVID-19, and the sheriff and the jail staff rejected that offer. And the real reason for that is because they do make profit off of video visits and phone calls at our jail. And BLM, working with other organizations locally, has found the contracts and the numbers that they make each year, but the county actually makes 6 figures each year through the money that they make off of these contracts for video visits and phone calls. So that's really disheartening to hear, I think, as people who are focused on creating some justice within this system. Another question, I know we're kind of winding down here, but I guess, Malik, we have heard that some people are kind of opposed to this bill, and I'm sure I've seen it personally on social media, and I'm sure some of the people listening today have too. What are some of the things that are the main arguments against this bill, and what do we say back to that, I guess?
Honestly, I'm kind of in a silo in terms of the type of dissent that I'm hearing about the bill. And honestly, all of the dissent has been patently untrue, just falsehoods. People are unaware of what is actually contained in this bill. I've heard many times, we're just gonna, we're just going to let dangerous people out into our communities. And my response to that, is
Oh, I think he dropped off there.
So I think he'll jump right back on. Yeah, he messaged me just saying there's like some tech issues. So maybe
I know that. Yeah, I know that one thing that I've kind of heard is that people are worried about victims' rights, and like Liz mentioned, and the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice has mentioned, is that victims advocate groups were actually in support of this bill, which I think is really great. I don't know, Malik, if you want to follow up. I know you've been having little tech issues.
My computer keeps going to sleep for some reason. Anyway, we are not letting dangerous people out into the world. That isn't the impact of our bill. We're strengthening the standards for people to be detained in jail, right? The decision to hold somebody in a cage before they've been convicted of the crime should be a very weighty decision, and we are adding the discretion for judges to make those determinations. And and we are restoring the presumption of innocence by removing the presumption of detention. And so that doesn't mean that people cannot be detained for detainable offenses. It means that we're going to make our system actually pay attention to who is being charged with things, and if that means that they should be in incarcerated pretrial. Another kind of opposition, another opposition point that I've heard is that that police would no longer be able to do their jobs and effectively, and that's one of the kind of rhetorical false arguments that I've heard that are kind of based in fear mongering and just not true. And I would just kind of urge people to actually look at the contents of what was passed. You can go and see online on ilga.gov the actual statutes that were passed and learn about what actually happened in this lame duck veto session, because there's a lot of false information floating around.
Okay. I guess my last question for both Vera and Malik is is there anything, you want us to know from the realm of your work that we should be focused on in the upcoming couple 2 years, I guess? So, BLM and DSA and a lot of other groups on this call, we're going to continue to organize around pretrial fairness, prison justice. We're going to continue to organize, but is there anything specific you want us to continue to organize around or focus on it as we wait for these new laws to be implemented?
Yeah, I would say, just like you alluded to before, we're still living in a pandemic, and people who are incarcerated, either pretrial or actually in prison, those are our most vulnerable members of our society. And so we have to continue to advocate for folks to receive vaccines. We need to continue to advocate for people who cannot advocate for themselves, and for improvement of conditions on the inside. I dropped my little stress magnet and it's now just rolling all around the room. But yeah, the work doesn't stop. The work continues. There are still people languishing in jail, and we have to make sure that that us as advocates, that we're making sure that those people are treated like human beings.
I basically was gonna say the same thing. Thanks, Malik.
Thank you, Vera. Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you to you both. Honestly, I think that just hearing from both of you in very different positions, but it's really great to get some clarity around some of these issues and hear, Vera, you being local is just like what you deal with folks who are living in McLean County, right? And you're talking to and working with folks in the jail. It's really great to be able to hear from both of you, and I appreciate you participating in this discussion. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Linda Foster, who is the president of the Bloomington Normal chapter of the NAACP. And she's going to talk a little bit about why the NAACP supports this bill, and how this is going to be benefit for Black folks and poor folks. So go ahead, Linda.
Thank you, Olivia. I really appreciate this conversation and all of the parties that has been part of bringing attention to what's going on. As we know that down through history that if people are not talking and sharing, people don't know. And so I appreciate the education that Black Lives Matter and the other entities are bringing to the table. The NAACP, founded in 1909, has been on this forefront for a long time. The NAACP advocates for smarter and results-based criminal justice policies to keep our communities safe, including judicial discretion in sentencing and to end of the racial disparities at all levels. United States is the home of the world's largest prison population. As touch on crime, laws have been put on unprecedented numbers of nonviolent offenders behind bars in recent years, and our neighborhoods are no more secure. The NAACP supports the end of what is known as cash bail, pretrial fairness act, because we know that people of color are incarcerated at a higher rate, in jail longer, take pleas more often, and are convicted without appropriate, adequate representation. Lives are destroyed and families are separated, and the cycle continues. Anyone can be charged based on the presumption or just because of the color of your skin. The NAACP believes cash bail has a long history of depriving people of color their freedom. Let's not go back 400 years because of the inability to pay bond or what we consider ransom. People don't have money in the bank, line of credit, or just have money up under the mattress waiting to be used and to be available for bail. Most lives live from paycheck to paycheck, and some are falsely incarcerated. Most don't know how to defend themselves against allegations or know their constitutional rights. People of color and low incomes are targets for the criminal justice system. Jails are being built better and staffed more adequately than schools. Teachers have to buy their own supplies for their students in some cases. The economic burden of running these systems is put on the backs of Black and brown people. There are structural and systematic racism, discriminations, and policies. We know that. That's why it's important to remove these barriers. We already have high unemployment, health disparities, wealth gap, housing and educational limitations. And at the helm of all of these are sympathetic racism and classism and biases. Pre-trial Fairness Act ensures poverty is no longer a driver of incarceration. Lack of access to wealth shouldn't be the reason people stay in jail. Bail reform should reduce mass incarceration. I want to tell you about a story that the NAACP is working on right now. There was an individual that was pulled over by the police without probable cause. This individual was arrested, taken to jail. This was a traffic incident. Ended up being that he did not have his license were expired, not suspended, expired. And this individual was taken to jail, lost his car. Family had to decide, do they get him out or do they get the car out? And it was most important to be able to get him out so he can continue to provide for the family. But it was a struggle because the transportation now was lost. We need to continue to fight this good fight in instances just as that and so many others, as Vera has stated. So we stand in support of the Pre-Trial Fairness Act because it's only the right thing to do. So we appreciate, again, the voices because you're being heard. We know that there's nothing new about what's going on, and it's been going on for many years. So I say to each one of you all, as we fight this good fight, we need to continue to do it. The NAACP is committed. We're meeting with legislators. We're lobbying. we lending our voice, we collaborating, and we advocating, and we will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. We appreciate it. I've appreciated, being able to work with the NAACP, especially over the past couple of years, partnering with Black Lives Matter Bloomington Normal, and the great work that you've done in this community, especially this summer too. So thank you.
As we know, it takes all of us. Not one has got the gamut on everything. So it's going to take every one of us that's on this call and those that are not to keep fighting this good fight. And I have appreciated the relationship that we've had with Black Lives Matter.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple questions to Kyle. And so he is part of a local group that's been doing some organizing around, the jails, COVID in the jails, decarceration, and things like that. And so Kyle's just going to talk a little bit about some of the local organizing that's been happening. So Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about what local groups are doing here to organize around decarceration?
Yeah. So first off, hi everyone, I'm Kyle. I've been recently working with Decarcerate Blono, and I appreciate everyone here who's helped put this all together. I'm also now a co-founder of the Illinois Prisoner Rights Coalition. To answer that question, let's go ahead and just briefly discuss what's going on locally in the McLean County area. So I have some stats for the jail here in McLean County, accurate as of the 11th of this month. So the jail population on a given day is around 255 individuals on any given day. The number of inmates pre-trial totals, that's going to be including felony, misdemeanor, drug offenses, are going to be 326 individuals. For proportions by race, there's 140 non-white identifying individuals and 115 Caucasian white identifying individuals. And as of right now, there are 7 individuals who are inmates in the jail that have COVID. And in terms of staff, there are 8 individuals who have COVID as well. But as of right now, as of the 11th, the current COVID cases is going to be 0. But that's only due to the relevant information as of the 11th. Like, anything could have changed by then. We need to continue to fight for decarceration. We need to fight for an end to profiting off of imprisonment. We need to continue to fight for police accountability by abolishing qualified immunity, reasonable limitations on police unions, and real tangible penalties for police departments that fail to comply with the law. And most importantly, we must continue to envision different ways to address societal problems and the issue of public safety without relying on someone with a gun, a badge, and authority whose main tool has been violence and coercion. Organizing is a very important step to accomplish these goals. So how can everyone here today get involved? If any of you are wanting to get more involved in these efforts, please keep in touch by emailing us at decarcerateblono@gmail.com. Also, we have a sign-up sheet that will be dropped in the chat for anyone who wants to be up to date with any actions that we're planning in the future. The last thing I'll say is that we have another meeting set on February 18th, and it'll be announced again at the end of the meeting here. And this may change based on anything life brings at us in the next coming few weeks. But if you want to attend, please attend. If you can, invite your friends, keep the momentum going. We're just getting started with this work. Like, we really need to keep this pushing. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Carla Bailey Smith from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bloomington Normal to talk about the breakout rooms.